Chers cousins, honorables ministres de couronne, mesdames, messieurs, dear friends. The sun has risen to reveal yet another day. The birds in the trees sing their songs to herald this new day and to revel in it. The birds are, of course, joyfully oblivious to that which you and I know is happening all around the globe to all of humanity. Perhaps for a fleeting moment, when we wake up in the morning, we share in the oblivion of the birds. It is not long, however, before we find ourselves rudely disabused of their carefree perspective. We awaken from our dreams into what seems to be a daily nightmare. We shudder as we realize the reality to which we have again awoken. We shudder to think that we will have to awaken to this reality morning after morning, perhaps for a long time to come. If the birds seem especially joyful in their songs lately, it is perhaps because the air is a little cleaner for them. With the profound reduction in air travel and motor vehicle traffic, there is interesting reporting about air and water quality improving around the globe, particularly noticeable in urban areas such as New York, London, and Paris. In Venice, for example, the once murky canals are now crystal clear. It is also becoming clearer to us day by day that the pattern of consumption and living we have adopted is both dangerous and entirely unsustainable. We have been told as much, taught as much, and preached to as much for decades. Today, as we drive down empty highways through cities which are becoming like ghost towns, we perhaps regret that we have kicked the can down the lane so far and for so long. We now know that this fearsome plague we are experiencing originated in cruel and unhealthy wild animal farming practices designed to capitalize on the ever increasingly exotic culinary tastes of the economically overprivileged. Once again, money proves itself to be the root of all evil, and those who have most of it have lived their indulgent lifestyles at a very grave cost to the rest of mankind, for whom they have slight regard. Even now, in the midst of a global crisis, we are witnessing the typical and unsurprising spectacle of the wealthy hoarding provisions and looking out for number one, while at the same time we see ordinary women and men with the hearts of servants sacrificing what little they have to rush to the aid of those who have even less. We must be particularly thankful in this hour for the heroic sacrifices of those employed in the healthcare industry. Nurses, orderlies, doctors, and surgeons who are on the front lines of this great war. Think too, however, of grocers, truck drivers, first responders, and those who work or volunteer in nursing homes or in homeless shelters. Think of the homeless. Think of those imprisoned and those who work with them. And give a thought too at this time, if you would, to those working in scientific research and development, who are laboring mightily to try to come up with an effective treatment for those who contract the novel coronavirus. Scientists form a class of people who, in my own country, have become targets of scorn and mistrust in recent decades from a certain portion of the population who regard science as an affront to God and to the culture of faith. Our God, however, is the scientist to end all scientists. God created the human intellect and invested it with magnificent capabilities, including the capacities of logic, analysis, and deductive reasoning. He would not have done so had he intended us to live ignorantly and barbarically. There is a hypocritical perplex, however, among those who scorn science as though it were the enemy of the faith, is there not? These very same persons will pat themselves on the back taking credit for that which they had no part in. We invented the automobile, they might say. We invented the airplane. We put a man on the moon. We cured smallpox. We cured polio. We can do anything. We've got this. But wait a minute. Hold a little. Did we do those things? Did we, you and I, have a part in any of those accomplishments? Did I cure polio? I don't believe so. Did you put a man on the moon? I think you will concede that you did not. So if you and I did not do these things, who did? A very small number of highly intelligent and highly capable, scientifically minded women and men, blessed by God with extraordinary talents and capabilities, accomplished those feats, while the rest of us merely reaped the benefits of their hard work, scientific research, and intellectual agility. By all means, give all credit to God, the source of all intelligence, science, and talent. But let us not make the foolish mistake of disparaging those who have used those divine gifts as they were intended to be used. Without those intrepid souls, man is doomed to retreat into a dark and dreadful post-civilization era. When, therefore, we encounter the spectacle of a scientist on the one hand, and a reality television star on the other, standing at the same podium and offering conflicting information, let us use the intelligence and the good sense with which God has blessed us to reject the foolishness of those who speak without wisdom, and to embrace instead those whose words emanate from a treasury of learning and knowledge. In times of uncertainty, we must, all of us, look to God for strength and wisdom, and to authentic leaders for authentic leadership. When authentic leaders whose knowledge is rooted in science and medicine tell us to wash our hands thoroughly, to socially distance ourselves from one another, to avoid public gatherings, and to stay in place, we must humbly allow ourselves to be led by these trustworthy voices, for our good and for the good of all those who are at most risk of catastrophe. When, on the other hand, inauthentic leaders lie to us, tell us that what we are experiencing is but a hoax, that it is not so serious as some would have it, that it is all nothing more than fake news, we must recognize such errors for the errors that they are, and, for the sake of those in grave peril, ourselves included, we must reject the false leadership of those who speak from positions of invincible ignorance. This is no time for foolishness, and this is no hour for fools. Even so, at this very hour, there are people in my own country forming long lines to purchase more guns. Is that a sign of where we are headed? Is that a sign of which leaders we are choosing to follow? A couple of evenings ago, I watched a documentary about the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. It was rather startling to watch in the context of all that is happening today. In 1918, viruses were unknown. Microscopes were not yet powerful enough that scientists could see viruses, and medical science was, as a result, at a loss as to how to combat the flu. Social distancing was not practiced, therefore, and the result was catastrophic. Today, however, we cannot plead ignorance. We know what a virus is, how it travels, and what it can do. A virus is not, as some would have it, an invisible enemy the way it was in 1918. In the year 2020, viruses are visible, and we know, thanks to advances in science and medicine, precisely what precautions we should take and must take in order to prevent the spread of them. Take those precautions, therefore, rejecting every word or poor example to the contrary of what the scientific and medical communities know to be true. When this pandemic is ended, whenever that may be, the world will be a much changed place. That much is guaranteed. When we have reached the end of the present trial, however, will we have learned the lessons which this pandemic has taught us about ourselves and about our society? Or will we give in to the temptation to immediately return to the status quo, ignoring those lessons to our own peril? My hope and fervent prayer for humanity is that we opt in favor of learning, reason, and reform. What part can you and I play in learning? What part will you and I play in a meaningful reform of the way we approach so many things? Perhaps our isolation during this period will provide us with time to think about where we are now and how we may revise circumstances going forward in such wise as to provide for a more equitable civilization going forward. My dear friends, this chapter in humanity's common journey has only just begun. There will be difficult days ahead. There will be pain, and there will be trials. To sugarcoat the situation is useless, and to bury our heads in the sand is an exercise in folly. What we must do is fortify ourselves and maximize the use of our intellects, resolving to correct all that which in our lives and in our world is so gravely in need of correction. Yes, it is a virus that has closed down the planet and brought mankind to its knees. That virus, however, finds its origins deep within the darkest recesses of a cruel, self-centered, and self-indulgent culture. And that culture must not be permitted to go unchecked and uncorrected. My dear friends, we may reach a point during this calamity when not even science will be able to rescue us, either because we will fail to cooperate with those who attempt to lead us in the right direction, or because we have simply reached the limits of our capabilities. We are, after all, mere mortals, and our talents and resources are finite. In the last analysis, we are infinitesimally small beings who walk upon a tiny little speck which floats in the midst of a vast universe. And there is much more which lies beyond our control than falls within it. When we have reached checkmate in this particular game, however, be confident in the loving and paternal presence of a higher power and a greater force than even the universe itself. When we have no place left to run, we may breathe a sigh of relief to see the arms of an invincible Father outstretched to embrace us, and if it is our time, to take us home. There will be no social distancing in that moment, when our Father stretches out his hand to wipe away all our tears. The comforting embrace of the Father of mankind and of all the universe is only a prayer away. Be humbled, therefore, before the Creator of all things. Now is the time for humility. In 1963, Admiral Hyman Rickover presented U.S. President John F. Kennedy with a small plaque of wood and bronze bearing the words of an old Breton fisherman's prayer, which says, "O God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small." The president kept that plaque on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office of the White House. That old Breton maritime prayer seems uniquely fitting in these times, and in this moment, which seems to us so frightening and so utterly overwhelming in its scale and scope. O God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small. I am sure the president, whose task it was to lead his country safely through the Cuban Missile Crisis, could instantly relate to the sentiments reflected in that prayer. This is a moment indeed in which we find ourselves in a vast sea, we who are only little, sailing in boats which are very small. We are not alone, however. When the storm rages, and we are sure that our boats will capsize, look to the surface of the water. If you see someone walking on the water, do not be afraid. Invite him into your boat. My dear friends, may God be with us to bless us and protect us, to give us hope, to fill us with his peace, to be light in the present darkness, and to steady our small boats in the midst of his vast sea.